The languages of the Caribbean reflect the region's diverse history and culture. There are 6 official languages spoken in the Caribbean. The 6 languages are Spanish, French, English, Dutch, Haitian Creole, Papiamento. However, there are also a number of Creoles and local patois. Dozens of the Creole languages of the Caribbean are widely used informally among the general population. There are also a few additional smaller indigenous languages. Many of the indigenous languages have become extinct or are dying out, at odds with the ever-growing desire for a single Caribbean community. The linguistic diversity of a few Caribbean islands has made language policy an issue in the post-colonial era. In recent years, Caribbean islands have become aware of a linguistic inheritance of sorts. However, language policies being developed nowadays are mostly aimed at multilingualism. Languages. Most languages spoken in the Caribbean are either European languages or European language-based Creoles. English is the first or second language in most Caribbean islands and is also the unofficial language of tourism, the dominant industry in the Caribbean region. In the Caribbean, the official language is usually determined by whichever colonial power held sway over the island first or longest. English. The first permanent English colonies were founded at St. Kitts and Barbados. The English language is the third most established throughout the Caribbean. However, due to the relatively small populations of the English-speaking territories, only 14% of West Indians are English speakers. English is the official language of about 18 Caribbean territories inhabited by about 6 million people, though most inhabitants of these islands may more properly be described as speaking English Creoles rather than local varieties of Standard English. Spanish. The Caribbean English speakers are outnumbered by Spanish speakers by a ratio of about 4 to 1 due to the high densities of populations. On the larger, Spanish-speaking islands, some 64% of West Indians speak Spanish. The islands that are included in this group are Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and some tiny islands off Central and South America. French. About 1/4 of West Indians speak French or a French-based Creole. They live primarily in Guadeloupe and Martinique, both of which are overseas departments of France, Saint Barthélemy, and the French portion of Saint Martin, both of which are overseas collectivities of France, the independent nation of Haiti, and the independent nations of Dominica and St. Lucia, which are both officially English-speaking but where the French-based Antillean Creole is widely used, and French to a lesser degree. Dutch. Dutch is an official language of the Caribbean islands that remain under Dutch sovereignty. However, Dutch is not the dominant language on these islands. On the islands of Aruba, Curaçao and Bonaire, of Spanish-Portuguese-based Creole known as Papiamento is predominant, while in Saint Martin, Saba and Saint Eustatius, English, as well as a local English Creole, are spoken. A Dutch Creole known as Nederhollands was spoken in the former Danish West Indian islands of St. Thomas and St. John, but is now extinct. Its last native speaker died in 1987. Other languages. Caribbean Hindustani. Caribbean Hindustani is a form of the Bhojpuri dialect of Hindustani spoken by descendants of the indentured laborers in Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, Jamaica, and other parts of the Caribbean. Sanami Hindustani. Omniglo. Retrieved June 8, 2016. Indigenous languages. Several languages spoken in the Caribbean belong to language groups concentrated or originating in the mainland countries bordering on the Caribbean: Suriname, Guyana, French Guiana, Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, and Peru. Many indigenous languages have been added to the list of endangered or extinct languages, for example, Arawak languages, Caribbean, Taruma, Aturada, Warao, Aracuna, Akawai, and Patamona. Some of these languages are still spoken by a few people. Creole languages. Creoles are contact languages usually spoken in rather isolated colonies, the vocabulary of which is mainly taken from a European language. Creoles generally have no initial or final consonant clusters but have a simple syllable structure which consists of alternating consonants and vowels. A substantial proportion of the world's Creole languages are to be found in the Caribbean and Africa, due partly to the multilingualism and their colonial past. The lexifiers of most of the Caribbean Creoles and Patois languages of Indo-European colonizers of era. Creole languages continue to evolve in the direction of European colonial languages to which they are related, so that decreolization occurs and a post-Creole continuum arises. For example, the Jamaican sociolinguistic situation has often been described in terms of this continuum. Papiamento, spoken on the so-called ABC Islands, shows traces of both indigenous languages and Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch lexicons. Closing parenthesis. In Jamaica, though generally an English-speaking island, a patois, often called patois, drawing on a multitude of influences including Spanish, Portuguese, Hindi, Arabic and African languages as well as Irish, is heard on an everyday basis. Contact between French and English lexified Creoles is fairly common in the Lesser Antilles, and can also be observed on Dominica, St. Vincent, Carriacou, Petite Martinique and Grenada. Others. Asian languages such as Chinese and other Indian languages such as Tamil are spoken by South Asian expatriates and their descendants exclusively. In earlier historical times, other Indo-European languages, such as German, could be found in northeastern parts of the Caribbean. Change in policy. Throughout the long multilingual history of the Caribbean continent, Caribbean languages have been subject to phenomena like language contact, language expansion, language shift, and language death. Two examples of the Spanish expansion, in which Spanish-speaking peoples expanded over most of Central Caribbean, thereby displacing Arabic-speaking peoples in much of the Caribbean, and the Creole expansion, in which Creole-speaking peoples expanded over several of islands. Another example is the English expansion in the 17th century, which led to the extension of English to much of the North and East Caribbean. Trade languages are another age-old phenomenon in the Caribbean linguistic landscape. Cultural and linguistic innovations that spread along trade routes, and languages of peoples dominant in trade, developed into languages of wider communication. Of particular importance in this respect are French and Dutch. After gaining independence, many Caribbean countries, in the search for national unity, selected one language to be used in government and education. In recent years, Caribbean countries have become increasingly convinced of the importance of linguistic diversity. Language policies that are being developed nowadays are mostly aimed at multilingualism. Demographics of the 38 million West Indians, about 62% speak Spanish. About 25% speak French, about 15% speak English, and only 0.7% speak Dutch. Spanish, English, and French are important languages. 24 million, 9 million, and 5 million speak them as second languages. The following is a list of major Caribbean languages. Linguistic features. Some linguistic features are particularly common among languages spoken in the Caribbean, whereas others seem less common. Such shared traits probably are not due to a common origin of all Caribbean languages. Instead, some may be due to language contact, and specific idioms and phrases may be due to a similar cultural background. Syntax. Widespread syntactical structures include the common use of adjectival verbs for e.g., he dirty the floor, the use of juxtaposition to show show possession as in English Creole, John book, instead of Standard English, John's book. The omission of the copula in structures such as he sick, and the boy reading. In Standard English, these examples would be rendered, he seems, appears, is sick, and the boy is reading. Semantic. Quite often, only one term is used for both animal and meat. The word nama and nyama for animal. Meat is particularly widespread in otherwise widely divergent Caribbean languages.